Hello and welcome to another episode of me, Gemma from Life of Pyrography. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to prepare your resin and also how to do a two-part pour. So let's get started. First of all, the type of resin that I use is a 2-to-1 ratio, so that means 2 parts of part A to 1 part B. And that's done via weight. So I'll show you guys now once my camera decides to focus. There we go. Okay, so first of all, you're going to measure out your resin so that you can get an accurate amount there. Today I needed roughly 300 grams of resin. It's okay if you go over a little bit. In larger quantities like this, it's not quite so bad. It's only when you're doing the very small amounts that you really need to be careful. So now I'm going to grab my next bit in order to show you what I'm doing. There we go. So I need hot water, or warm water, which I then put part A in, and I'm going to leave that in there for about 5 minutes so that it can heat up a little bit, make the liquid a little bit more runny. Because at the moment, as you can see, it's really thick and gloopy, which is not great for those bubbles that get trapped inside. So we'll come back in 5 minutes and go from there. Okay, so now we've come back 5 minutes later, and as you can see, the liquid inside is a lot more runny than it was before, which is exactly what we wanted. Now I'm going to be adding part B, which is the hardner side. Now with this I want approximately half of what I put in before. So if you remember, we weighed out 300 grams of the epoxy resin. So now I want 150 grams of the hardner. Now I tend to like a little bit over, just so that it tips the scale in my favour slightly. And as we went over, it's not going to hurt if I go over a little bit with this, but do take your time, because you don't want to suddenly add a ton of hardener, because it tips the balance and it will mess up your resin massively. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to take my silicone stirrer and I am going to stir this for 5 minutes. And I mean 5 minutes. This is to make sure that all of the parts are mixed thoroughly, which obviously is quite difficult when both parts of the epoxy and the hardener are in fact clear. So you need to make sure it's done for 5 minutes. We'll come back in 5 minutes. Okay, so it's now 5 minutes later, and as you can see, everything's now nicely mixed in. There's still quite a lot of bubbles in there, so I now need to leave that alone for another 5 minutes so that all of those bubbles can rise to the top and we can get rid of them. Once that's happened, we can then start pouring. Okay, so then after getting your mould prepped and ready to go, we start pouring in the resin. I tend to do it a little bit at a time, just to allow it to slowly move into the areas that I want it, and then apparently decide to move my camera about arbitrarily all over the place, just to confuse everybody, and then carry on pouring again. Apologies for my camera focus as well. It was deciding to try and focus more on my hands than on the tray at this point. Kept hunting. But yeah, slowly add your resin in, especially when you've got deep sections like the sides of the tray here, because you will end up with bubbles getting trapped down below if you pour it in too quickly. You want it to slowly build its way up. So once you've done that and you let it settle a little bit, you then grab our blowtorch and very lightly and quickly take a blast of heat over the areas to remove any bubbles. You don't want to spend too long on those, because if we do, we risk the epoxy heating and superheating to the sides of the silicone mould, which will then rip the mould when we come to remove it afterwards. So just to make sure I've got as many of the bubbles as I can, I also take one of these longer thin tools to go around all of the edges and just gently try and remove any bubbles that might be stuck to the surfaces of the mould. You don't want any of those stuck there because they will cause problems for you when you take your mould out later. You'll be left with these little holes and gaps where the bubbles left air in the way. So again, I grab my torch and just quickly remove any of those bubbles that I've managed to shift. Just short bursts of heat, nothing more. I decided to add a little bit more resin back in because I didn't want any gaps in the initial pour. It's very important to try and balance the surface that you're working on so that everything's level. I was struggling a little bit with the level of my table on this particular day, so everything was wanting to drift off to one side, making my life a little bit difficult. So lesson learned there, make sure you level out your table first. Okay, whilst I finish off doing this bit here, I'm going to be adding in some plant life and some little butterflies and other decorations into this piece today. So as you can see here, these are one of the little butterflies that I decided to add in. These guys are ones that I bought off of Etsy. They're paper and then laminated. They still provide a gorgeous effect without the added cost of using real butterflies. I always get nervous using real butterflies as well, especially if they're very delicate. As you can see, these are really very pretty little imitation ones, which are then added in. Just using my tweezers there to arrange everything. And as you can see, again, the lack of the level of the table is plaguing me because I've got a gap again, which I then pause the video here to re-level the table. So as you can see here, I've now sorted that out. The gap's no longer there, and I've arranged my butterflies where I want them. Now I've started adding in the little pressed flowers that I've got. I just wanted to add some lighter colours and slightly more delicate looking flowers to match the colour scheme of the butterflies. So we've got sort of the reds, yellows, whites, just to keep a kind of colour theme going on without sort of going overboard. I like the look of these sort of purple flowers as well, so I wanted to add a little bit of colour in with them. And just really have fun with where you feel like placing them. It's not set in stone completely where you place them when you initially put them in. You can move them about within reason, but kind of try and have a plan and an idea of roughly where you want them to be. You then want to start pushing the resin over the top of the pieces of all the different petals and everything so that the resin soaks into them a little bit and pushes them down against the mould rather than them completely floating on the top. This again is another reason why it's a two-step pour rather than everything in one go. Okay, so at this point I decided that I wanted to add some gold leaf into the piece as well. I thought it would add a nice added detail. So So first of all, I have some loose gold leaf, which I take small chunks of, and then I place them into the resin. And I just start adding in these sections of gold leaf. It can be a little bit tricky getting them off of the equipment. But again, you've got a reasonable amount of time to be able to play around. You usually got an hour or so, roughly, with your resin before it starts becoming too thick and is setting too much before you can do anything with it. Okay, so once I've added all the pieces of gold leaf on, I then use a cocktail stick to mix and break up the gold leaf even more and mix it around into the resin and work it down into the sides of the tray here so that everything is incorporated properly. Okay, so once you've done all of that, you then need to leave it to set overnight so that it is hard before doing the second part of the pour. Here we are the next day. We've again done our resin, and now I've added some black pigment to the resin, which I'm now going to pour over, which creates a smooth back and will really add to the overall effect of this piece once it's revealed. So make sure you cover over every part of it, pour it all in. Especially get all those last little bits out there, try and use every part of it that you can. Again, take a blowtorch and remove any of the bubbles. You're going to want to check it several times for sort of 10 or 20 minutes, because even though it's only shallow, you will have some bubbles lying around. Obviously fish out any bits of debris that decide to wander on into your piece. You don't want those in there. Again, repeat this step a couple of times and then you can come back to it the next day. Okay, so here we are with the reveal, what it looks like. Do be careful when you're removing the mould, just in case any parts have stuck just slightly. But as you can see now, by adding the black onto the back of the piece, it's made those colours really pop, and those butterflies stand out amongst the gold leaf and the foliage there, creating a really beautiful piece. Thank you guys so much for joining me again. I really hope that this has been a helpful tutorial for you. I will see you all again soon with another tutorial and more top tips. Bye for now.